Steve Whyte, it is a pleasure to be able to speak with you today. Thanks so much for joining us for the conversation, joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to share this time with you.
I appreciate it, and that's just a reflection. I'm right there with you, absolutely. So, I mean, just in the little bit that we've talked, kind of before we jumped on, I think we've got a treasure trove of things that we can share.
Mm,
But in order to get there, I'd love it if you could share a little bit about your journey. It doesn't need to be super in the weeds, but what brought you to where you are now in life? What brought you to your current expression and what you're helping to birth
mm,
into the world? And then also, if you could just give people a little bit of insight around your book and even the book series
mm,
around the concept of crown or owning your crown or finding your crown.
mm. So I say my journey has been colorful, which is quite the opposite of my whole brand being monochrome. Um, I never ever planned to be doing the work that I'm doing today. I was actually working in accounts, and I went to I remember this particular morning, I was feeling so ill,
Mm,
and, um, when you're younger, you can just push yourself through things, and so my lifestyle at the time wasn't very, healthy. I
mm,
worked a lot of hours, I worked multiple jobs, and there was no balance, um, and yeah, I just remember feeling really unwell that day, and I went to work, and I was just, like, so bunged up, and I remember getting to the office and feeling like I needed some type of respiratory relief,
mm,
and I went to the kitchen area and I kind of poured this menthol solution into like hot water and sat with it under my desk, under my neck, and
mhm.
just inhaled as I was typing away and crunching numbers. The next thing I realized or remember is I woke up in the hospital,
Oh my
and
gosh.
um, yeah, it was later revealed that I had a seizure,
Wow.
and yeah, they found me in the bathroom. So yeah, I would say that was the significant change.
Yeah.
I lost all my independence, couldn't really be alone, and I just felt so miserable. I felt
Mm,
so miserable, and it was around the time social media just started. MySpace was still there. It
mhm.
was coming to an end, and then Facebook just started, and I recall just going online one day and posting the words, "I wish you better days." I don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
I just felt compelled to write it, and then I did the same thing the next day, and the next day, and every day for a year.
The same message.
Same message at the same
Beautiful.
time every day, and it started to, like, really pick up, like, people expected it, and it's just, like, a nice affirmation, and, gradually over time, they evolved into other people's quotes
Mhm.
from self-help books, and then my own quotes, and they were just simple things
Yeah.
like, "I hope you find some peace today. I hope something good happens for you today." And then they evolved into like paragraphs, then blogs, and then I had a Facebook group called 100 million positive people, and it was my goal to get 100 million people in there. And then I started receiving emails from people. So I set up this little website, people asking me for advice, and meanwhile, I'm in bed.
Like,
I'm bedbound.
I mean, would you say you were in recovery or you're still kind
No,
of
no, no.
figuring
I
out, like, even
Yeah, I
what's
was
going on with
having
you?
I sorry, I forgot to say, I continued to have seizures every
Okay.
week, sometimes multiple in a week, so I
Wow.
couldn't work.
Yeah.
Um, so much that I was afraid to leave the house, I was afraid to go to the bathroom, just they were unpredictable.
Yeah.
And so I just kept posting and posting, and my thing was I just didn't want anyone to feel what I was feeling.
Yeah.
And so you journey on. I was later on diagnosed with epilepsy, and life continues to happen, and it just evolved, and you start attracting like-minded people. That opened up opportunities for me to do certain courses in life
Mhm.
coaching, later on going back to uni and doing counseling with psychology. And this kind of became my world, this kind of self-improvement world. And I became one of those toxic positivity people, I did. And it was working really well for me.
Mhm.
Um, Everyone who knew me as the positive person, the resilient one. And yeah, it was masking a lot of things that I wasn't yet ready to face.
Yeah.
Um, and then I would say, it really took off. And sorry, I was getting a lot of emails, and one of the people who I had, connected with in that time, he was established in America, and I said to him, "How do you deal with all the emails?"
Mm.
And he said, "What emails?" And I said, "I'm getting about 300 emails a day, people asking for advice."
Yeah.
And he was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm replying to all of them." And he said, "You can't do that. Maybe you should, think about writing a book."
Yeah.
And so I went back online and I copy and pasted everything I'd ever written and shared. And that became my first book in 2010. And that
Beautiful.
was called Align Yourself. And then 3 months later, I put out another one, and it was called The Presence Driven Life.
Mhm.
And then 3 months later, I put out another one, and it was called Above and Beyond. And then I compiled all three books into one and called it Better Days.
Beautiful.
And then from there, the Better Days brand was born. It evolved over the years into a magazine, a blog, charity. Um, and yeah, that was the start.
Yeah.
That was the start.
And where was your health in that time period of real prolific, maybe not production because you've been producing the entire time and then it was more of a consolidation, but as you were publishing those first three, where were you at as far as your own health and your own, kind of coming back to center and finding yourself in that
Mm,
space?
I was hiding.
Mm,
Yeah, I wasn't well.
yeah.
But my thing was, if I can put the focus on other people, then it doesn't matter about what I'm feeling. It's not
Mm,
about me. It's
yeah.
about this thing that's just come into my heart all of a sudden, and I
Yeah.
now feel I have to serve, I have to give.
Yeah.
And yeah, that became my life. And um, should I continue the story?
Well, I love where we're going because now it
Yeah.
sounds like if we turn the page or get to the next chapter, coming
Mm,
from that place of, no bad days, only, positive
mm,
vibes, only good ways of thinking, you know, and I feel like that's functional for a time, like
mm,
a lot of things that we use to either, self-medicate, self-soothe, self-regulate. It
mm,
works until it doesn't work.
mm.
So, was there a point where it stopped working and you really had to kind of turn towards some of the things that that were, under the covers or, locked away in a cupboard that we didn't want to look at, and then were you able
Yeah,
to move through those?
yeah. So my life has been very what's the word? It's been very balanced
Mm,
in that a lot of good things happened in my life.
mhm,
Um, but at the same time, a lot of very painful things happen.
yeah,
And so neither gets the attention that they deserve.
yeah,
So I found it hard at that time to deal with some of the traumas and some of the emotions that I was experiencing because I was winning, and I
mhm,
should be excited about this project, and I should
mm,
be, the most confident person in the world because everyone tells me I'm inspiring.
mhm,
But meanwhile, there's this other side to me that feels the opposite, and neither can get the credit. I can never be sad
mm,
because I'm expected to be the positive one.
mhm,
And then I can never really, really truly enjoy myself because I know there's sadness that I don't want to, in a sense, disregard or treat as though it's not there. And so
yeah,
the point for me was 2014. My wife and I, we lost a baby,
Mm,
but this was at a time where things were going really well for me,
mhm,
and so I continued to work and continued to push through. And I was actually doing a tour, and I was in the States. And on return, 2015, I just crashed.
mm,
Everything just hit me. Um, I just didn't want to be here anymore.
yeah,
And it was at that point where I realized I needed to start to address some of those things, and that positivity and thinking positivity was not going to reach those places. They were
yeah,
too deep.
yeah.
And so I deleted everything. I came
Wow.
offline, and I had one question for myself. And the question was, who am I?
Literally one of the most powerful questions we can just let sit
Mm.
and not need to answer immediately.
And there was only one way I was going to find the answer out, and that was to delete everything that had already defined me.
Mhm,
And so I wanted to make sure that I was doing the work because I genuinely love to serve and feel that's my purpose,
yeah,
and that it hadn't become an ego thing.
mm,
There's no way to test that in the battlefield. So I had to step outside of it.
yeah,
And so when I deleted that, I no longer had a bio. So I didn't have any demands. I didn't have any schedules, any emails, any mailing list.
mhm,
And there were no demands from me outside of my family. And so I started to learn myself. I learned that I like gardening. I learned that I like painting. I learned that I didn't particularly like the diet that I was brought up eating.
yeah,
I learned that I didn't like the way I looked,
mm,
and I wanted to change my hair and grow it. And I I was getting closer to myself when I stepped away from being who I had to be for everybody else. And so I did that journey, and then so yeah, at that point, my final book was called The Suicide Note,
mm,
and that was just before my breakdown. And then I stepped away, and then I said I was done with writing. Do you want to do anything else? And then
yeah,
I said if I did come back to write, it'd be for something special. And in 2018, my son was born. And,
beautiful.
yeah, he had a stroke at birth, and it meant that he has mental difficulties.
Mhm,
He's got cerebral palsy,
mm,
and so I thought it was a perfect time to come back out and write again, and that's where Crown was born.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And then so you've kind of reemerged, if you
Mm,
will, since 2018 or so.
yeah.
Almost I won't say a reinvention, but a reinvigoration, like a
Mm,
recommitment, reconnection with yourself.
mm,
And I wanna emphasize one. I mean, everything there was absolutely beautiful, and I really hope people take the time to listen to everything that Steve just shared, because there is a wealth of treasure that we can take with us on our own journeys. And I think the biggest thing is one of the things that stood out to me most was, the like let's call them the highs and the lows, or
mm,
the pleasure and the pain. We never really give either its due, because a lot of times when we hit the high, it's almost like we're in a casino. It's like, yeah, that was great. When's the next one?
mm,
Or if we're addressing a low, we try to avoid it. We try to escape it. We try to, it, it's not there. It's not there. I don't need to look at it.
mm,
But then it's either we're not getting that same high that we did before from the successes, or from the blips on the radar that are positive, and we're trying to run away at the same time on the inside from these more things that we don't want to look at, and it really ends up, I feels like it frays us at the edge. It pulls us apart from who we are. And I love what you shared about the different seasons that we can experience in life.
mm,
And I feel like our seasons aren't quite as delineated or predictable as the four seasons in a year, because in your sharing, some of your seasons took more years than
mm,
not, and others there were shorter periods of time. So, what was it, as you were asking this question and unpacking and getting behind who am I?
mm,
What was it that helped you bring yourself back to that place of that personal power and more of what I like to call peaceful presence, non-attachment, being in the observer
mm.
state, to be able to embrace the highs and really embrace the lows as well as we're navigating through this entangled web of life that we're all in.
I think it's perspective. I
Mhm.
think when you're young, you think you know everything.
Oh, you
And
did that too?
yeah, you think you know everything. And especially if you are already doing things that most people your age haven't done
Mm,
or are not doing, you can feel as though you are an anomaly and mm, that you are somehow the exception, that those things cannot bother you or
mhm,
affect you. And I think as you grow older, you have more life to look back on, and you have more data, you have more
mhm.
reference points, and so you have more to work with in terms of how to analyze your life. To you know when things are off because you've had a lot of times in your life where things have felt off, and so you
Yeah,
can see the patterns. I think when you're young, you're not aware or not as aware of patterns because you haven't lived for very long.
yeah,
And so I've noticed significant patterns in my life, a loop. And
mhm,
um, I think the the main thing that I learned in that time is that you only have the perspective that you have at the stage that you're at.
yeah,
And so trying to be in the present and remain here. I think when I was younger, I felt I was in the future because I was
mm,
ahead of my peers. But
mhm,
then I was always looking forward. What's the next thing? How can I win? How can I
mm.
be better? How can I improve? How can I have more? As I got older, it was the complete opposite. It was, how can I do less? How can I have less and be more content?
Yeah,
And so I think what those 4 years taught me is that I didn't need social media. I didn't need to be popular. I
mhm,
didn't need to be told I'm the inspirational one. I didn't need the retweets or the likes or the followers or the shares
yeah,
because I went 4 years without it. And during those 4 years, my my environment validated me.
yeah,
And so by stripping things away, becoming more of a minimalist,
mhm,
I was able to appreciate the things that remained. And
yeah,
that was the true value that I feel I unpacked by starting to just strip things away,
mhm.
that it was not possible for me to see in my younger years.
Of course. I
Mm,
I remember, I think through teenage into my 20s, and I'm just reflecting, as I'm reflecting internally as you're sharing.
mm,
It felt like it was almost like maybe being caught in a dust storm
mm,
where there's so much going on. To your point, we don't necessarily have the space. We're not necessarily seeking that space for self-reflection, self-awareness, because
mm,
there's a lot of exploration going on. There's still a lot of newness, to your point.
mm,
And so I think with that perspective, one thing I like to say is if it isn't enough now, it's not going to be enough when or then either.
mhm,
And I think it's such a powerful exercise, really holding up that mirror to ourselves and asking the question without an expectation of an immediate answer, because it's there. We're too multidimensional for a simple answer
mm,
behind who am I. But getting to that place of, like a Marie Kondo with like clearing the space, like, does this spark
mm,
joy? Does this thought spark joy? Does this thing I'm doing, does this fulfill, is this something that I want to keep continuing in my life?
mm,
Or is it just something I've habituated because that's what I was introduced to, and that's the way my parents did it, my friends did it, my community did it at the time. So I feel like it does take a certain amount of, there's some, we need to have a spark. You mentioned, when you started to just be on your consistent, diligent sharing that first year.
mm,
From what you shared, it sounded like you had the spark in, even in this kind of like,
mm.
debilitated condition that you were experiencing, this season that you were in.
Yeah.
So for those that are, maybe not in that place of even entertaining the thought like I can do it, we're still on that, I don't know, this is kind of gnarly. What are some things that you've seen from your work and your travels that can help us connect with our own spark? Can get that little bit of kindling going that we can then turn into a real generator for us to be able to be of service more in life?
I think that's a great question, and I think for me, I always knew that I was going to do something of service,
Mm,
but I didn't know the medium. I didn't know how. I always thought I have to get successful first. And when I've got enough money, then I can help people.
yeah,
So that was my goal. I didn't know that it was going to be the complete opposite. I'd lose everything, lose my independence, lose the thing that I thought would get me the wealth,
mm,
and that I would make the wealth through the brokenness. And then that would be the thing that helps people. And so I think sometimes it's not about having just like a strategy or someone like me tell you this is what you need to do. I think it's more um, create an environment within your life that brings you the closest to yourself, and what you are called to do will flow out of you organically, as opposed to saying, I want to be an author because he's an author.
yeah,
I didn't, I could never have foreseen this because I didn't have the skills that I have today back then.
right.
I didn't have the interest that I have today back then. I didn't even like to read
Okay.
back then. So I never could have predicted this. So imagine someone
Yeah.
told me then, hey, you know, um, or I was listening to a podcast and someone asked the same question that you
Mm,
just asked, and the guest said, "You just got to go for it. Just start writing." You
mm,
know, I wouldn't have done it because that was not my interest.
right.
However, life navigated me in a way into that interest. And so I would say the key things or the skills I'd say that's required for anything is being consistent,
Mhm,
um, attention to detail. And I would say the last thing that's really helped me is studying.
mm,
I I work on my craft every single day.
yeah,
I'm I write every single day. I wake up before everybody every single day. I Whether I have a book coming out or not, I work on my craft.
yeah,
And I think that first I wish you better days every single day, that was the beginning. It was something very small. It didn't start off with me writing 3 hours a day.
right.
It was something very small. So, in short, I would say to anyone listening, if you have something in your heart or you feel there's something you want to do, find the smallest way you can possibly do it, even if it's in private, and just have some consistency until it becomes a habit, and then build on it bit by bit,
Yeah,
and then create an environment that um, can hold that thing, that's healthy for that thing, that helps that thing to grow. And over time, it will be whatever it's supposed to be.
and I feel like that's universally applicable.
Mm,
And, when Steve's talking about environment, I'm thinking the internal and external environment. So
mm,
it's, it's a we're all I feel like we're always in co-creation, and we're in co-creation with our environment, internally and
mm,
externally. We're in co-creation with our family and our connections. We're in co-creation with the world at large. And I think it's so valuable to take that one step. And one thing I like to share is, I mean, that can be standing up and sitting down from a chair 10 times. That can
mm,
be going for a walk around the block until I can do it without feeling out of breath. It can be sitting down with a blank piece of paper in front of you and just start writing, even if it's, I don't know what to say right now. Just start
mm,
writing that and then see what comes. And then along with that, I'm very my focus and my fascination is the internal environment, that our terrain.
mm,
And so what I like to share is, in order to kind of help with the the doing of the openness, which I would say would be, clean up your environment one small thing at a time, releasing the attachment to the outcome.
mm,
I feel is a really powerful value add that we can add to that equation. Where we might have an idea of where we want to go,
Yeah.
but I'm not attached to how I'm going to get there, and I'm not attached to when I'm going to get there.
Mm,
Because when we're building a powerful and strong foundation, that isn't always overnight. Sometimes it can be. In my experience, it's not that often though.
mm,
So, consistency, showing up for yourself, have an idea of where you're going, but not needing to define every step, allowing for that openness, and we
mm,
can call it universe, inspiration, wisdom, inner knowing to come in. And then another thing that has been really powerful that I feel like is part of that equation is staying a little more open and curious as opposed to thinking we know,
mm,
and asking why. To your point, it's like, oh, somebody comes to me and they wanted to be an author. Well, why?
mm.
And really like hold ourselves to task with that why, and don't let ourselves off the
Yeah.
hook with just the first answer. Keep taking
Mm,
those steps to really get to that core root of the why. Find that essence, find that spark.
mm.
And then I feel like once we're kind of like got all of these aspects in play, that's when things start to really get expansive and dynamic.
Yeah. And just to add something to that point, the why. I'm someone who likes to understand things,
Hmm.
but I'm also aware that there are some things that I am not supposed to understand.
Yeah.
I think sometimes as humans, we think that our minds are, I think we think they're better than they are. Just that if we don't understand it, then it's either not true, it's not important,
Hmm.
or we create these meanings, but it's just some things are beyond the words that you've been taught in
Yeah.
school. Some descriptions and some reasons behind things are beyond your vocabulary. You only know what you know. And so if we're trying to use the human mind that is just programmed from a system or a book to understand something that's bigger than the
Hmm.
person who created that system and book, we can end up asking questions that we will not find the answers to in our mind. And I think I learned that quite early on, that there were just some questions that I wouldn't be able to have the answer to here now.
Hmm.
And so I am the meticulous planner. I do like every single puzzle piece and every step. However, I'm not attached, as you said, I'm not attached to those steps. I just like to have them to minimize room for error.
Yeah.
So that with being consistent, showing up, attention to detail, and not always having to know the outcome. I think that those are the main things that have kind of really sustained me. You know, the old me,
Hmm.
and then coming back as the new me, I was able to keep those same characteristics, and in a sense, the formula works.
Hmm.
It's about consistency. I think that would be the most important thing. Um, and yeah, that I think that's where people struggle. It's that they quit
Yeah.
or they give themselves reason to not continue the thing that they said they're passionate about. And the love, this thing that I'm talking about is love for me. That spark where you described it, it's love. That thing that I felt when I wrote I Wish You Better Days, it was love. I wanted
Yeah.
to give love to someone. I wanted them to feel well and
Yeah.
feel strong and worthy and loved and cared for. And the desire that I had to share that was bigger than anything that I was going through in my life,
Yeah.
anything that I would go through in my life, and anything anyone else could expect of me or thought I should be doing or shouldn't be doing. And oh, you should post your photos in color.
Yeah.
You should, you should sell ebooks. You should.
Yep.
But I know what my mission is, and I'm I'm committed to it. And
Yeah.
so I think the more you build those muscles and habits of consistency and detach from the outcome, as you've said, I think there is where you can start to feel a bit more free in your creation or whatever field you've chosen to do.
Yeah.
And when you feel free, um, I think it's in that place where you get the answer, "Who are you?"
Yeah, I love that because it really
Mm,
is about, and it's an internal freedom. If we can really get to that place of freedom internally,
mm,
then that's something that it's not bestowed by any government or any, body of anything outside of ourselves. That is a sovereign right, a divine right, I believe
mm,
is for all of us. And for me, getting to that love, getting to that place of openness and consistency and just doing. Or did nope, I'm just
mm,
taking one step. I'm just going to do it.
mm,
Um, that is, there's some navigation there, but it's something that's available to all of us. And I think that self inquiry is probably, like you said, self inquiry, consistency, showing up, releasing attachment to the outcome. I feel like there is a little bit of like a trust fall factor to it as well,
mm.
where it's like, listen, I have, and this is something I experienced. So I was a designer. To your point about, I wasn't looking for any of this. I was a designer, happy with. I was working in user interface, user experience, and happened to be Kelly, my wife Kelly, and I happened to be working with ourselves and each other, and moving
Mm,
through our stuff and unpacking it. And I was just feeling better and better. Um, but then when it happened, when everything shifted, it was just, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing now, because I had been kind of unpacking and, disentangling myself from others' opinions or intentions or thoughts or
mm,
whatever, and just coming back to that, that consistently letting that question percolate, who am I?
mm,
And allowing answers to come through. And sometimes they're different answers. They're not always going to be the same, because I feel like we are, to your point, we are multifaceted, we are multidimensional. So it's
mm,
more like, I feel like we can think of ourselves maybe as a prism or almost a disco ball, where there's multiple facets, and there's more. If you're familiar with the term Gestalt, I learned it from design school.
mm.
But the sum of the parts, or the whole, is greater than the sum of the
Some of the
parts.
parts.
Yeah. So we are having a human experience, and we are also
Mm,
spiritual, energetic, emotional beings.
mm,
Um, from my own experience and from research that's been done, and things that have, experiments with the CIA, we are coming to an understanding that our consciousness is non-local. It's not just, you know,
mm,
it's not just trapped within the the structures of the brain.
mm,
Um, and it can be a little freaky once we start getting to these places of openness, and we start asking questions without a need to have an answer, and then all of a sudden we hear an answer, or we feel an answer, we get a knowing.
mm,
And then having that freedom internally to then act on that intuition, or that inner knowing.
mm,
It's not something that we're taught or trained to do, so it can feel scary, it can feel intimidating. And also recognizing that I think we are a yes and, as opposed to an either or,
mm.
which gets me to that place of, playing in the spectrum of gray. There is no black and
Yeah.
white. There is no right
Mm,
or wrong necessarily. It's all
mm,
perspective, perception,
mhm,
what we're carrying with us.
mm.
So what you shared about getting that space to create, I like to call that the sandbox of life, where we are in
Okay.
this kind of creator space, and we're working with raw materials, and sometimes, we build something up and it's like, oh, it's not quite what I thought it was. So it's okay that we let it dissolve and let it
Mm,
fade away, so we can build something new. So what are some ways that you've embraced your own multifaceted nature of, a lot
mm,
of the labels and roles that we play in life, but also this more bigger sense of self beyond the who am I?
mm. So I remember at a time, I've always been victim
Mm,
of doing too much,
mm.
and what tends to happen is because I had to learn a lot of things. I had to learn a lot of skills.
Mm,
I didn't have a big budget. And so I had to learn how to use a camera, and I had to learn how to edit, and I had to learn how to do photography, and how to do graphic design, and how to build websites. And I had to do all these things for myself, almost like the test dummy, and slowly get better and refine and look at someone else's website and say, okay, if I do that, then mine will look more professional. And I slowly just refined these skills until I became very good at a lot of things. And so now I'm still in that space of not being able to know if I'm doing it because I can or if I'm
Mm.
doing it because I want to, right? And so, but one day I was very confused about my next step. And I spoke to a friend and he asked me a question and he said, if money wasn't an object and your family were taken care of, what's the one thing that you would do for the rest of your life? And I thought about it and the answer was right.
Mm.
And he said, I think that's what you should do then. And yeah, I think that was a really good way. If you give yourself that type of ultimatum, like, what would you choose? Um, because, a lot of the motivations are then stripped away. If you take
Yeah.
away finance or whatever people do things for, what would you actually do with your time? If it was the last day of your life, what would you do? And so once you have that answer, the next question should probably be, why am I not doing it?
Mm.
Or how could I begin to do more of it? And so I'd say that was probably the thing for me. It was, okay, it's what you're called to do
Mhm.
and then what you're skilled to do. And so the point for here is, once I started studying psychology, the big question, how much of this is nature versus nurture? And
Mm.
I realized that for most of us, a lot of our personalities and behaviors, and even our view on life for ourselves and others, is based on nurture.
Mhm.
It's it's based on our experiences or things, the deep programming that we've been taught. And my goal during that time was to get closer to my nature.
Yeah.
And so, in order to do that, I had to step away from a lot of things, a lot of people, and begin to really pay attention to my habits and seeing how they were changing.
Yeah.
And then after my getting closer to my nature, okay, some of the things I learned about my nature.
Mm.
I like to help people.
Yeah.
Um, I like to make people feel good. Um, I like um, I like being calm. I like
Mm.
calm environments. These are things that sometimes you don't know if you're in the wrong environments. You don't know that you like calm, or you don't know that you like helping people.
Yeah.
You just until you take yourself out of it. And so now it was like, okay, I want to learn my super nature.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so my super nature is all these skills I've acquired. How can I now use them to do the more of those things? How can I share more love, more calm? How can I how can I excel in those things using all of these skills that I've built up?
Yeah.
So not using the skill as a career path. So I'm not a cinematographer.
Right.
No, I'm not a graphic designer. No, I'm an author, but this is how I present my work, and I can use these tools without taking those titles.
Yeah.
And I think that's a way you can use the nurture to support the nature to tap into your super nature. And that's
100%.
and that's basically the journey I went on. But that's still up and down, and that's
Oh,
not
yeah. Up, down, all
it's
around.
yeah, and as you mentioned, I call that space the gray,
Mm.
um, because um, I started this conversation of saying I was very self-help. I don't have anything against self-help and positivity and the law of attraction
Mhm.
and self-help books. However, is half of the picture.
Yeah.
A lot of it is mind. There's another part to it, feelings. And that's where my message, it was very powerful and it was very inspirational and motivational, and it helped a lot of people, but it was incomplete. There was a whole
Yeah.
population who couldn't think what I was writing
Couldn't even
because
connect with the
they
material.
couldn't even connect with it, because the place that they need to be spoken to is the feeling.
Yeah.
And so that's where Crown comes, and it now romanticizes trauma, if you want to
Mm.
put it that way. I call it a haunting dystopian beauty, and it's it's going to make the tough conversations and the tough emotions palatable. It makes it poetic. It makes it
Yeah.
beautiful, and that's the key. I don't want people to think to be successful or to be a high achiever, you just got to be the happiest person or the most confident person, and you've got to write the most empowering caption under your photo to appear to be doing well. No, the
Mm.
most successful person is the one who can say, I'm not doing well, and that's okay. And that's what I had to learn. And that's really what Crown did. It gave people permission to feel, you know, and it
Mhm.
was a safe space to do so. And now we have a complete message,
Yeah.
two sides, the self-help, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, and you put them together, and we live in the spectrum of both,
Mhm.
and that's the gray area. And so, yeah.
And what I'm hearing is you've been employing a lot of work or practices or awareness around acceptance and honesty.
Mm,
Because if we're, and a lot of times we're not honest with ourselves out of a survival need. Our
yeah.
needs aren't being met. And so, we pump ourselves up, or
Mm,
we bluster and we peacock, or, we do things that maybe aren't really fully aligned.
mm,
But a lot of times we feel like, well, we don't have any other choice. This is my only option. And really, like in the gray, there is no only option. Like all possibilities exist if we're open
mm,
to them.
yeah.
And you
Uh,
nailed something that is so important, and it's a subtle shift, but it is a monumental shift. Because a lot of times if we're feeling stuck or we're feeling separate from ourselves, and the way separation from self expresses is really isolation and separation from others, we feel alienated.
mm,
And when we're in that place, I feel a lot of the questions we ask are, can I? Like, can I
mm,
ever get out of this? Can anything ever be different than what I'm experiencing right now?
mm,
And it's a binary question. There's only two possible answers. It's either a yes or a no.
mm,
But when you added how in front of the
mhm,
can,
mm,
that gives our system space to work on a more dynamic question.
mm,
And I like to say, if we don't give our mind body system something to chew on, or maybe a problem to solve, or even a thought to entertain, it's going
mm,
to do it for us. It's going to find something to be hyper vigilant about,
mm,
or to keep us, in this kind of safety bubble, instead of getting into that more, a little bit less defined, a little bit more possibility space of
mm,
asking these questions. How can I? Who am I?
mm,
And it can be a little disconcerting. It can feel a little intimidating or unsteady, but there can be really amazing power in embracing that perceptive unsteadiness. One thing I like to say is, it's important to get comfortable in the free fall.
mm.
So I don't know if you've ever been skydiving.
I haven't, but that's on my bucket list, actually.
I I did a tandem, and I highly recommend it because
Mm,
you kind of get the awesomeness of it without all of the
mm,
responsibility of, getting back safely to the ground. I'm trusting my partner for that.
mm,
And so I went skydiving, and there's a split second when you leave the plane where you do feel like you're falling, like a fraction of a second. And then that passes, and all of a sudden, even though you're falling, it feels like you're flying.
mm,
And so when we can get more comfortable in the free fall, yeah, it can be scary. That
mm,
initial drop, that initial commitment to doing something different, or taking a different path, or thinking a different thought. But stepping into that place of, bravery, freedom, whatever we want to call it, that is that's the ether, that's the alchemy for answering those questions for ourselves. And to your point, I don't feel anyone but us can answer those questions.
mm,
And to some extent, the answers are all going to be very hyper personal. They're all going to be really specific to us. So there is that aspect of self resilience.
mm.
I like to say self dedication too. I'm dedicated to my self expansion, self
Yeah.
awareness, self development.
Mm.
So when we're in that gray zone, when we find ourselves there, which we're all there whether we admit it or not.
Yep.
Sometimes we keep things, black and white, yes or no, for out of a necessity for safety, or whatever it is for us. But what are some things that you recommend or that you've done to find more, maybe more lightness, more play, even though we are in these kind of more sensitive
Hmm.
areas?
I think it's quite interesting. Um, Whenever I say the grey area or the grey zone, as we've said it here today, and or if I speak about it, um, people like the color black. It has a negative connotation. The grey, you assume that it's a miserable, horrible place. But if it's a combination of light and dark, as is everything in our world, then I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think there should be this quest to escape the grey,
Mm,
to try to get to one of these extremes, you
yeah.
know? Um, there's a quote, I think it's in Crown 1, um, Crown 2, there's a character called Shadow. And um, what's beautiful about Shadow is, oh, he gives a beautiful speech. And I want to paraphrase it, but he says, I've been with you for your whole life. Um, to see me is to see you. To love me is to love you. You cannot outrun me. I'm always with you. Even when it appears I'm ahead of you, you know, and it's just so beautiful. And it's just this kind of like, you cannot escape your own shadow, nor should you try to.
Yeah.
And then he says to harm you is to harm me is to harm yourself. To hurt me is to hurt yourself. And so sometimes the shadows in our lives, we harm ourselves by trying to force ourselves into this light. And I don't know
Mm.
what this light is that everyone speaks of, because you know shadows tell you what you cannot see, right?
Yeah.
There's something in the way of the light. See now if I can create a shadow. Okay, my
Mhm.
hand is blocking the light, but if you can see the shape of my hand, it, it's the shadow that you're seeing. So the light isn't showing you my hand. It's the shadow that's showing you my hand. And
Yeah.
so to escape the shadow is to live in a space where you cannot see the truth. You know, you're not seeing the full truth. You're
Yeah.
seeing just the light. Or if you're just someone who likes darkness, you're just seeing dark.
Yeah.
But the gray, for me, isn't a miserable place or a sad place. So I wouldn't advise anybody to escape the gray, because I believe the world is highlights and shadows and
Yeah.
is a balance. And now, if you ask me, what do I do when I'm in a difficult time? Some of the ways to navigate into a brighter space. Of course, there are things. Um, Me personally, I had this conversation earlier. Um, it's an environment thing. I
Mm.
like to surround myself with things that make me feel good. When I can see life around me, it makes me feel more alive. When I feel more zen and I feel warm, it makes me feel alive. When I feel cold
Mm.
and uneasy and anxious, it makes me feel dead. It makes
Yeah,
me
like a
feel numb,
yeah.
and there's no flow. I like flow. Um, so yeah, my answer, the old me would have said, "Hey, yeah, just think positive."
Right.
But the new me is, no, I'm going to sit with my emotions.
Yeah.
I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to learn. What are you trying to teach me? I'm going
Yeah.
to pray. I'm going to meditate. Um, I'm going to have times where I don't want to speak. I'm
Mhm.
going to have times where I just want to cry. I'm going to have times where I want to laugh. And so that's my way of navigating. I haven't always chosen the healthiest way. Sometimes I just
Sure.
work, work, work. I
Yeah.
distract myself.
Yeah.
But more recently, I've been sitting with my emotions and letting them pass, and just continuing to take my next step with the new knowledge. I
Yeah.
think there's another quote in Crown that says, "Remember in darkness what you learned in the light." So some of us get through these seasons, these storms, these wildernesses, and we're just happy to be out of it. And then we go into another storm, but we haven't applied any of the lessons that we've learned from the previous time. We do the same thing again. And I, I
Expect a
spoke
different
about,
outcome.
yeah, insanity. And so I I'm very aware now of the patterns that
Mm.
I create, but also some of the patterns that I fall into.
Mhm.
And then I always try to change something each time.
Yeah.
So being self-aware, as you said, and making small, manageable changes that could influence a different outcome potentially the next time.
Yeah. The
Mm.
recognition of a pattern or the awareness.
Accountability,
Yeah.
being accountable to yourself.
Yeah.
If you say you want to do better, then you don't have to accomplish that now, but just doing a small step
Yeah.
that may seem insignificant to anyone else in the world, but to me, that was all I could do.
Yeah.
Do another one tomorrow.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's really been my method.
Because that step that you took, those first steps that we all take, that step has never been taken before in the
Mm,
entirety of human experience, human existence, human history. I was so my one thing that I like to play with or understand more is, I like to come at it from a like a not scientific standpoint, but I'm always interested in like the hows and the whys. I always ask, well,
mm,
how, why? So I came across some information that the chance of being born human is 1 in 400 trillion to 1 in 400 quadrillion. So 400
wow.
trillion is 400 with 12 zeros after it. So I come across that. I'm like, all right, if that's the chance of being born human, then we are all a miracle. It's
Mm,
miraculous that we are here,
mm,
not only living a human life, but you and I here having this conversation together. That's even more astronomical.
mm.
And we're
Do you know what
so
else that
hmm,
sorry, do you know what
yeah,
else
no.
that puts into perspective?
Hmm.
How small our problems are and our
It,
understanding of
It's a
our
magnitude of
problems.
scale, exactly. If we're so
Mm,
close to it, we're so close to the fire, we're so close to the tree, everything is going to seem monumental. Everything
mm,
is gonna seem more intense, more traumatic, more important, more
mm,
necessary. And what I've experienced, and I feel you're there as well, where we pull back internally, give ourselves more internal space
mm,
to ask, to be open, to inquire, to release attachment, and to really embrace like that, to your point about the shadow, like he or she or it or they ain't going nowhere. That is with us, so we
mm,
can continue to be at odds with it, or let it,
mm,
run our lives to some extent, or we can, I feel like there's a certain aspect of either surrender or openness, of embrace, like,
mm,
yeah, you're come here, shadow, like bring it in. Like, what wisdom do you have for me? What healing can we achieve together?
mm,
What reconciliation can we establish, so we
mm,
don't need to keep carrying with us all these trappings and programs and ways of being, to your point, upon inspection might not even be ours. Where
yeah,
did we get them from, and how important is it that we keep repeating the loop or the thought or the behavior
yeah,
until we get to that place of like, I find it's kind of incremental though. It's, with awareness of patterns, it's like, oh, I saw it. There's that
mm,
recognition aspect, that recognition layer. And then it's like, oh, there it is again. And that can be, I wonder, why do I keep doing that? But if we're not in a place of presence, we're
mm,
always going to be, the excuses, I never have enough time, I'm always pulled in too many directions. And if that's the belief that we carry, and if that's the reality that we experience, then that's going to be it,
mm.
unless we
And
start
even those
to
thoughts,
shift.
those are just learned
Yeah,
responses to things. They
exactly.
could be coping mechanisms, it could be fear, it could be that's how you've always responded, so that's how you always will respond. Until you do something different, you won't realize that, hey, I could change this pattern. And then you don't know where that leads to. As I said,
Yeah,
I didn't foresee any of this. And that first step I took, it was so important,
yeah,
but I didn't. make it so important. It was just a I wish you better days.
Yeah.
But had I known everything that would have followed, the pressure I would have felt in that moment to make sure I post it on time every day. And so that's a great example of the not knowing is sometimes the superpower, you
Yeah.
know, because now when you have those demands, if you know where it's going to head to, it may influence your approach and
Yeah.
commitment to your approach.
Yeah. And even when you were in that, like, really, an intense state of duress, you were in an intense state of limitation.
Mm,
From this is just me kind of hearing and then reinterpreting. It sounds like there was also a really powerful place of freedom
yeah.
because you were sharing with abandon. You were sharing without, it's without anything containing your inspiration or your, that those rockets you're launching.
There was
And
no
it
agenda or
right.
expectation. And because of that, there was no attachment, there was only connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've tried to maintain that throughout. I never lose sight of the I wish you better days. Although my brands and businesses have evolved,
Yeah.
I always remember those moments, and um, and I try to keep that same energy with the work I do now. Although I'm way more experienced now,
Sure.
I still want the connection to feel the same, but
Yeah.
just more knowledgeable to put the knowledge to partner with it now.
And it's that inception point, that
Mm,
spark of life, that spark of creativity where, of course, it's going to evolve and grow and change and transform,
mm,
but there's always that nucleus that, almost like a personal big bang, you might even consider it, where
mm,
it's this explosion. We don't know how it's gonna shake out. We don't know how it's gonna form and be in
mm,
existence, but this was, an expansive place, even with a very limited expression in physical ways and kind of in ways of the world. But internally, you were blasting off.
mm. And again, when you're in it, you cannot see it
Yeah.
for as it truly is. And so I was in the fire, as you
Yeah.
described. And um, but at each stage, you cannot see it. You cannot see the magnitude of it. You cannot really appreciate it for what it is because you're in the game. And it's not until you can start to slow down
Hmm.
and step outside of the rules and step outside of the scheduling and observe,
Yeah.
and so that process that I went through in that 4 years, I've done it again, but I've done it alongside now my work. So I
Yeah.
create that same space. I still garden. I've kept some of those valuable things and I brought it into the new Steve
Yeah.
alongside the work because how beneficial they were for me when I wasn't being Steve White, and so
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's about just learning and applying what you learn to the new context of your next chapter,
Yeah.
um, and finding beauty in that at every stage,
Yeah.
despite how hard it is. If you are going through it,
Yeah.
it's about not looking for the positives in it. That's
Right.
very different. Just understanding that there is something happening in the uncomfortable place
Hmm.
that you don't understand that will become valuable at a later stage in your life.
Yeah.
But you don't have to worry about that later stage because you're here now. So find beauty
Yeah.
in the space that you're in now until you get to the next now and
Yeah.
then the next now. And yeah, that's really contentment, I think it is. I think
Yeah.
that's really, you have the hope. That's why it was, I wish you better days.
Yeah.
It was not a guarantee. I
Right.
never promised anyone better days. But it would be my wish that if I could grant a wish to everyone, it would be that I wish them better days, just something better than what their current experience is today.
And
And
those better days are there for us to claim
yeah,
if we are willing and open to it. And I feel, again, going back to that kind of, divine royalty, sovereign right.
mm,
Like that is those are our rights. Our right
mm,
is to create and cultivate peace within our own personal
mm,
universe, within our mind body, find
mm,
those balances. And sometimes life is asymmetrical, like you've
mm,
experienced. Like sometimes it is, sometimes we get into production and, you know, like my background is everything that you shared from web design, graphic design,
mm,
videography, photography. Those all take practices as well. We're not just going
yeah,
to open up, a design software and be able to create dynamic art immediately. It's
mm.
another learning.
And can I just give a quick analogy on the design? So
Please.
you've worked in design, so you know there are several ways to change the exposure on a photograph.
Mhm,
You can use the exposure meter, you
mhm,
can use brightness, you can use contrast, you can use curves.
mhm.
And the interesting part of all of them is they both have the black and they both have the white. And essentially, you're moving the highlights a little bit and you're bringing down the shadows, or you're increasing the shadows and moving the highlights, and both are moving towards each other. Very rarely do you bring up the highlights and bring up the shadows. It's
Right.
always a merging of the two, and that's that gray.
Yeah.
But the most important part of what I was just saying is that there is more than one way to to get to the gray or
Yeah.
to embrace the gray. And I think our own individual experiences are those different sliders. And you keep tweaking and you keep tweaking until it's a shade of gray that is well balanced, well exposed. The highlights do what the shadows can't do, and the shadows do what the highlights can't do. And that's the beauty of black and
Good.
white photography, is whatever you don't see in the light, the shadow will tell you.
Yeah.
And whatever you can't see in the shadows, the light is already giving you context on another part of the image that is enough for you to even use your imagination and color it yourself. And
Yeah.
that's what I try to do with my work, leave you space to color it however you want to. And so, yeah, I think that's a beautiful perspective if you can incorporate that into your life,
Yeah.
in that you have different sliders and meters, and it's up to you the shade that you want to see. But life will navigate you in different ways to get you're going to find a way to find contentment in the gray at some point. And
Yeah.
so I think the super nature part is, okay, do you now want your gray area or your gray zone to be overexposed or underexposed
Yeah.
or balanced?
And to your point, there are different seasons. Sometimes we're going to be a little overexposed. Sometimes we're going to
Mm,
be a little underexposed. But having the awareness and recognition of those shifting spaces within the gray
mm,
can help bring us back to for what is for ourselves more of that
mm,
balance.
absolutely.
Steve, I can't thank you enough. I mean, really, there's so much is here, and I can't wait for everybody to be able to listen and hear and incorporate or assimilate in whatever way makes sense for them.
Mm,
But really, yeah, it's you really mentioned the present, and that's literally the only place that can ever exist. And there
mm,
it's present, 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 present. So there's a lot of different. We've been talking about a lot of different kind of dynamic aspects of the present,
yeah.
and what I've experienced myself is the more time we practice getting to that place, the more freedom we have to unpack what's not ours,
Mm,
embrace that shadow instead of trying to keep keep that shadow aspect away, sit with it
mm,
like we would a friend, treat it like we would an innocent child. And that then I feel like is the inkwell that we can create our own new dynamic next
mm.
chapter from.
And I like to add as well that it's not about living miserably or just accepting that things are bad and that
Right.
it's not that. It's more by doing this process that I've spoken about today, that we've spoken about today, you don't make the mistake that I made, which was I never had time to really appreciate the good things and
Mm,
never had time to really address the bad. When you can find contentment in the gray, then both get the credit and the time that they deserve.
Yeah.
But for as long as you're trying to escape one, you're escaping the other.
There it is. That's it
Yeah.
right there. Yeah. I love it. Finding that balance, getting a little bit more comfortable in the unknown,
Mm,
recognizing and we are more than we are,
mhm.
one step at a time, coming back to those answers for ourselves, connecting with that spark, and then continuing on our journey just like any other journey. Like the only way to get anywhere is one step at a time.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like there's another aspect of that, like getting comfortable with that, because so often we want to sprint or we want to launch or we want to, we need to
Mm,
grind in order to launch instead of like, no, I'm just taking one step. And sometimes
mm,
it's a step forward, sometimes it's two steps forward, one step back. Sometimes we do a little side step. And to your point, it's just getting more comfortable in that space of, I don't know what my next step is necessarily, exactly the direction it is, but I'm
mm.
ready for whatever it is. That
And it might be stillness.
a lot of power. Oh my gosh,
It
that's so
might
much
be
power in the
stillness. Your next
stillness.
step may not be to do anything. It may just
Yes.
be being still so that you can be moved. It may not be something that you have to do. It may just be being. Maybe you've been doing for a very long time, and now's the season for you to just be. And then from that space of being, the next step will be revealed to you. That inner inquiry that you speak about of, your wisdom self. You learn. I had to be. My independence had to be taken away. I was
Mhm.
doing.
Right.
It was not. It was not until um, my independence was taken away and the doing part was taken away where that thing was birthed inside of me,
Yeah.
and then I could start to do again, but the thing that I was doing was very different after that.
Right. Because you
And
were
I've
doing it from a place of beingness.
doing from a place of being as opposed to doing from a place of needing.
Yep.
And so I've that was 2008.
Yeah.
I've been doing and being that since then.
Yeah.
And so my encouragement to anyone today is that you've got to, I think the first place to start would be to stop.
I'm doing silent clapping for anybody that's just
Yeah,
listening.
the
Literally one of
first
the most
place to
powerful things
start
we can do.
is just stop
Yep.
and almost imagine yourself just, I know this is going to make me sound old, but defragmenting, you know, defragment your Windows computer
Yep.
and look at all the compartments of your life and say, okay, which ones am I going to partition to another hard drive? Which
Yeah.
one am I going to close? And which one's using up the most processing speed? And uninstall and start to build from a place of nothing.
Yeah.
And then you'll only be left with things that are valuable. And maybe you then have the clarity to know what your first step will be. But if you try to take the old, busy, stressful routine and habits into this place of being, you won't have the clarity to be able to hear or see what's next. And I think you can only know what's next by being present where you are,
100%.
in my opinion.
I share that opinion, and it's like our entire talk. Kelly calls them truth bumps. I've been getting full body chills our entire talk, and so there's a
Bless
lot
you.
of there's a lot of, I feel like, universal wisdom in everything that you're sharing and everything you're doing. And I just can't thank you enough for shining your light in the world and being the beacon and the helper and the being of service in the ways that you are. It's spectacular.
Thank you. I love what you guys do. It's needed, and I love. I recently watched your video when you were showing what our energy field
Mm,
looks like. I just thought it was so powerful when you. If we could all see that every day, I wonder how it would make us behave differently. Or if
right.
we could see someone's in that frantic energy, maybe we would show more love or empathy and
Yeah.
patience towards their response to our question. Or if
Yeah.
we could see that someone was doing well and their force field was just all calm and balanced, maybe we'd choose better friendships because we'd want to be near that type of energy. And so just because we cannot see it, it doesn't mean it's not there. And
Yeah.
so when I saw it, it made me think, I usually feel people's energies, but to see it would be really powerful.
Oh
And
my gosh.
yeah, and so I found that really inspirational. I think it's a
Oh,
great perspective shift. And again, there's no right or wrong way. There's
100%.
only the gray. It's
There it
only the
is.
gray.
There it is. Well, Steve, thank you so much. This has been an absolute treasure and treat for my morning. Anyway, I know we're on your
Mm,
evening, so thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you so much for connecting today and for sharing your journey and for sharing your insight and all of the opportunities and tools that exist that we can then implement and apply for ourselves on our own
mm.
journeys.
Thank you for having me. I've
Yeah.
enjoyed it, and I hope it blesses someone.